custody fight and court spirals into shocking public humiliation for my dad. The drama was worse than any TV show. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but after everything that happened last week at the courthouse, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. My dad, Jerry, is 48 years old, and he's been fighting for custody of my little sister, Emily. She's 12. It's been a long, ugly process ever since my parents split up 2 years ago. The courthouse has become this weird, cold arena where my family drama plays out in front of strangers. I remember walking up the stone steps with my dad that morning. He wore this navy blue suit that didn't quite fit. He'd borrowed it from my uncle because he didn't have one of his own. He looked nervous, fidgeting with the cuffs, and kept whispering to me, "Just stick by me, okay? Don't let her rattle you." By her, he meant my mom, Claire. Inside, the place smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies. The waiting area had these hard wooden benches, and it felt like everyone was watching us even though they weren't. Mom was already there, sitting with her lawyer, this tall, sharp-looking guy in a grey suit. She looked smug, like she'd already won. Next to her was my Aunt Lydia, who always takes her side. I could feel the tension in the room like static electricity. Dad leaned over to me and said quietly, "They'll try to paint me as a failure, don't buy into it." He tried to sound confident, but his voice cracked a little. I felt this pit in my stomach, like I already knew today was going to go badly. When the clerk finally called our case, we walked into the courtroom. The judge sat at this huge wooden bench that made everyone else look small. My mom's lawyer started and immediately, listing off everything he claimed Dad had done wrong: missed child support payments, not having a suitable living environment, and even bringing up the fact that Dad lost his job last year. Dad tried to defend himself, but he stuttered and got flustered. At one point, the lawyer asked, "Mr. Jerry, can you provide evidence that you maintained steady employment in the past 6 months?" Dad hesitated, his hands shaking. "I have been doing odd jobs, construction work, handyman stuff. It's not steady, but it's honest." The lawyer smirked, glanced at my mom, then said loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, "So you admit you cannot provide a stable home environment?" It was like a punch to the gut. People in the gallery actually whispered. My dad's face went red, and I swear I saw tears forming in his eyes. That's when the humiliation really started to sink in. I sat there, my heart pounding, watching my father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, who always told me to stand tall, now shrinking under the weight of every accusation. And this was only the beginning. The longer the hearing dragged on, the more brutal it became. My mom barely had to say anything. Her lawyer did all the talking while she just sat there with a smug little smile, like she was watching her favourite TV show. Meanwhile, my dad kept fumbling with his papers. At one point, he dropped the whole stack of receipts on the floor, and the sound echoed through the quiet courtroom. People snickered. I wanted to crawl out of my skin. When Dad bent down to gather the papers, the lawyer pounced. "Your Honour," he said in this polished, patronising tone, "I think the display we've just witnessed demonstrates Mr. Jerry's lack of organisation and stability. How can he possibly manage the responsibilities of raising a 12-year-old child when he can't even keep his documents in order?" The judge didn't laugh, but the gallery did. I heard a guy behind me whisper, "Yikes." My dad froze for a second, his face burning red, before mumbling, "That's not fair, I was just nervous." I wanted to scream at everyone to shut up. Instead, I just clenched my fist so hard my nails dug into my palms. Then came the part that broke me. The lawyer turned to me. "Would the court permit a brief statement from the older sibling?" he asked. I panicked. The judge nodded, and suddenly I was standing there, all eyes on me. My mom's lawyer smiled like he already knew what I'd say. He asked, "So, tell us, do you feel your father provides a safe and stable environment for your sister?" My throat went dry. My dad gave me this look, a mix of desperation and trust. But before I could even answer, my Aunt Lydia piped up from the bench. "Jerry can't even pay his own bills, let alone raise a child." The judge banged the gavel. Order in the court. But the damage was done. Everyone heard it. I stammered out, "My dad, he tries, he works hard, he loves us." My voice cracked, and it sounded weak, almost pathetic. My mom's lawyer immediately twisted it. "So you're confirming, then, that while he tries, he cannot actually provide the necessary structure for a child's upbringing?" I wanted to shout no, but the word stuck in my throat. My dad was shaking his head, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was holding on for dear life. The judge called for a short recess after that, and we all shuffled into the hallway. That's when the real humiliation went public. The courthouse hallway was packed with other families, attorneys, even random people waiting for their cases. And my mom, God, she couldn't resist. She raised her voice just enough for others to hear. "Jerry, you're embarrassing yourself. Just give it up already." My dad's face crumbled. People stared. Some even smirked. He looked like a broken man standing there in his too big suit holding a folder of papers that suddenly seemed useless. And I realised the fight wasn't just in the courtroom. It was everywhere. When we got back into the courtroom after recess, the energy felt different. My dad sat straighter, like he'd gathered up what little strength he had left. I could tell he was humiliated, but there was this flicker in his eyes like he wasn't ready to let go just yet. The judge asked if he wanted to make a final statement before closing the argument. My dad stood up slowly, clutching the edge of the table. His voice shook at first, but he forced himself louder. "Your Honour," he said, "I know I am not perfect. I've lost jobs, I've made mistakes, but I love my daughter. Emily deserves a father who shows up. Even when things are hard, I may not have money, but I have heart, and I won't stop fighting for her." For a moment, it was powerful. Even the judge leaned forward a little, like maybe he was listening. But then my mom's lawyer cut in, cool as ice. "Mr. J, love does not pay rent, love does not provide health insurance, love does not create stability." He looked at the judge, then back at my dad. "In fact, Your Honour, I'd argue that this insistence, this refusal to accept reality is more harmful to the child than helpful." It was like someone popped the balloon. My dad's shoulder slumped again, and I felt this awful twist in my stomach. And then came the worst moment of all. My mom, who'd been mostly quiet, finally spoke up. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't have to. She just said, "Jerry, the kids deserve better than your pride. You couldn't even keep our marriage together. Why would custody be any different?" The room went dead silent. My dad froze, like she'd just stabbed him in the chest in front of everyone. I swear you could hear the silence, except for someone in the back muttering, "Ouch." My dad tried to respond, but his voice cracked. That's not fair. You know I tried. You know. His words tingled into stutters, and before he could finish, the judge cut him off. Mr. Jerry, please compose yourself. This is not the place for personal attacks. But the damage was already done. My mom had landed her blow, and everyone saw it. My dad's humiliation wasn't just legal anymore, it was personal, raw, and public. I remember staring at the courtroom clock, wishing time would move faster, wishing I could drag him out of there before more pieces of him were chipped away. Emily sat quietly next to me, clutching a small backpack like a shield. She whispered, "Why are they being so mean to Daddy?" And it broke me in half. I didn't know what to say, because the truth was, I didn't have an answer. The judge called for closing statements, and that's when the final blow came. A decision was looming, and you could feel the weight of it pressing down on all of us. And deep down, I knew it wasn't going to end the way Dad hoped. When the judge came back with the decision, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. My dad kept rubbing his hands together, whispering under his breath, "Please, please, please," like he thought sheer willpower could change the outcome. The judge cleared his throat and spoke slowly, deliberately, like every word carried the weight of a hammer. "After reviewing the testimony, evidence, and statements provided, it is the court's determination that custody of the minor child, Emily, will remain with the mother, Claire." I felt like the air got sucked out of the room. My dad's body went rigid. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might break his teeth. I could see his eyes glassing over, but he didn't move, didn't speak. The judge continued, "Mr. Jerry will be granted visitation rights every other weekend, pending proof of stable employment and housing within the next 6 months." That was a nail in the coffin. Everyone heard it. The whisper started immediately, people turning to each other, muttering things like figures or no surprise there. The humiliation wasn't private anymore, it was on display for an entire courtroom of strangers. My mom leaned back in her chair, her lips twitching in what looked almost like a satisfied smirk. I let her squeeze her hand, like they'd just won some kind of prize. I wanted to scream, "This isn't a game," but my voice stayed trapped in my chest. Then my dad tried to speak. "Your Honor, please, she needs me. Emily needs her father." His voice cracked on the word father. He stepped forward, but the bailiff shifted, ready to intervene if he crossed the line. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Jerry, the court's decision is final. I strongly encourage you to use the next 6 months to provide proof of stability." And just like that, it was over. But Dad didn't sit down. He stood there frozen, his hands trembling, his face turning red. "You don't understand," he said louder, his voice echoing in the chamber. "I may not have money, but I love her more than anything. Doesn't that count for something?" The judge's expression hardened. "Mr. Jerry, you are bordering on contempt. Please sit down." A murmur rippled through the gallery. I could feel the heat in my face, my chest pounding like I'd run a marathon. My little sister tugged at my sleeve, whispering, "Why are they being mean to Daddy?" again, but this time I couldn't even answer her. Finally, Dad slumped back into his seat, defeated. His hands covered his face and his shoulders shook. It was the first time I'd ever seen him cry openly in front of strangers, and the sight of it nearly broke me. Meanwhile, my mom walked out of the courtroom with her head high, like she was leading a parade. People actually moved aside for her, nodding, murmuring. My dad stayed behind, gathering his scattered papers with shaky hands. Nobody helped him. It was the lowest moment I'd ever seen him live through, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone there would remember his humiliation, long after the case was forgotten. We stepped out into the courthouse hallway, and the fluorescent lights felt harsher than ever. People were still milling around, talking quietly, but I swear half of them were sneaking glances at my dad, like he was some kind of spectacle. His suit was disheveled, papers clutched in his trembling hands, and he didn't even look at us. He just kept muttering, "I can't believe this, I can't." Then my mom appeared in the hallway, flanked by her lawyer and Aunt Lydia. She didn't bother hiding her smirk this time. "Well, Jerry," she said, voice dripping with satisfaction, "I guess reality finally caught up with you." Dad froze, like her words were a punch to the chest. He tried to reply, but his voice was raw, almost guttural. "Claire, this isn't the end. I'll fight for her, I swear." "Fight all you want." Mom cut him off, leaning casually against the wall, "but everyone here just watched you crumble in front of your kid. Maybe you should think about what humiliation really feels like." A few people nearby stopped walking, whispering. Some stared. One older man shook his head and muttered, "That's rough." I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. That's when my Aunt Lydia stepped in, her tone sharp and cutting. "Jerry, you've made a fool of yourself. People are watching. Emily's watching. Do you even realize how badly you've embarrassed yourself and your family?" My dad's shoulders slumped even further. I'd never seen him so small, so defeated. He just muttered, "I was trying," and his words trailed off. Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, don't cry," she whispered, her little voice cracking. He leaned down, resting his forehead against hers. "I know, Pumpkin, I know, Daddy's okay, just a little tired." But I could see the tears sliding down his cheeks anyway. I wanted to yell at Mom, Aunt Lydia, at the world, but I felt paralyzed. My dad, the man who once carried me through every scrape, every nightmare, was reduced to trembling, public humiliation, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. We walked slowly to the parking lot, the courthouse looming behind us like a monument to defeat. People passed by, glancing, whispering. I could hear someone say, "That's the guy who lost the custody case." Every step was like walking through a gauntlet. Finally, in the car, Dad just sat there, silent, staring at the steering wheel. Emily leaned against him, trying to comfort him, and I realized something. I had to hold it together for all of us. I broke the silence. "Dad, you're still our dad. You fought, and that matters. Even if everyone saw the worst part of it, we know who you are." He let out a shaky laugh, barely audible. "Thanks, I hate that they saw me like that. I feel so humiliated." We drove home in silence after that, the kind of silence that carries the weight of shame, disappointment, and unspoken words. I didn't know how we'd recover, but one thing was clear. None of us would forget how public humiliation had left its mark on my dad that day. The first few days after the courthouse felt like we were all living in a fog. Dad barely spoke, and when he did, it was in small, broken sentences. Emily kept asking if she could call him Daddy at school, and I could tell he wanted to burst into tears every time. At home, Dad retreated to his little workshop in the garage. It used to be a place where he built furniture and fixed broken stuff around the house, but now it was his refuge from the world. I could hear the soft hum of his tools and occasional sighs as he worked on small projects. Somehow, Watching him focus on something tangible helped him reclaim a tiny piece of dignity. One afternoon, I walked in to check on him. He was sanding a small wooden toy car, his hand steady for the first time in days. "Hey, Dad, that looks really good," I said. He looked up, a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. "Thanks, kiddo. You know, it's not about winning all the battles. Sometimes it's just about showing up, even when it hurts." Emily wandered in a minute later, holding a piece of paper. "Daddy, look, I drew us a picture of our family. See? You, me, and my name." Her smile was bright, innocent. Dad's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't shame, it was pride. You guys are my everything," he said, voice thick. He held the toy car and Emily's drawing together, like he was protecting them from the hurt of the courthouse. Over the next week, Dad started slowly picking himself up. He called some old clients for handyman work, cleaned the garage, and even organised a little Dad's date at home where he played board games with Emily. Every small victory seemed to chip away at the humiliation he'd carried around. One evening, he sat me down. "Look, I know what happened at the courthouse was brutal public humiliation. Feeling powerless, it gets under your skin, but it doesn't define me, and it shouldn't define us either. We'll keep fighting for what we can, and maybe next time things will be different." I nodded, feeling his weight lift just a little. It wasn't over and not by long shots, but the fight didn't have to destroy us. Watching him slowly reclaim his confidence, even in small ways, reminded me why we loved him. Emily chimed in, excited as ever. "Daddy, can we make a fort in the living room this weekend? You and me, just like old times." He laughed, the kind of laugh that carries relief and hope. "Absolutely, pumpkin, just like old times." That night, I realised something important. Humiliation might have been public, but healing could be private. And while the courthouse had seen Dad at his lowest, home was where we saw him strongest. Even in the face of defeat, the love, resilience, and small victories began to restore what humiliation had tried to take away. By the time the next visitation weekend came around, Dad seemed different. Not magically healed, but more grounded. He had a plan now, steady work, more organisation, and an effort to rebuild trust with Emily. The humiliation from the courthouse was still there, lurking in the corners of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. When we arrived at his apartment that Friday evening, Emily ran straight into his arms. "Daddy," she yelled, and he picked her up like she weighed nothing at all. I followed slowly, watching him breathe deeply, smiling despite the tension still in his shoulders. He had cooked a simple dinner, a little messy, but it was his effort that mattered. "I figured if I can't give you stability right now, I can at least give you a full stomach," he joked, making Emily giggle. For the first time in weeks, I laughed too. It was awkward, but genuine. After dinner, we sat down in the living room, the three of us together. Dad pulled out a stack of papers his plan for steady employment, a calendar for visitation schedules, and even a small journal he'd started, writing down things he wanted Emily to know about him. "I'm not perfect," he said softly, "but I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." Later, Emily handed him a drawing she'd made at school. It was a simple stick figure family, but she'd coloured them holding hands, smiling. He looked at it, tears brimming again, but this time they were different, less shame, more gratitude. "You see this?" he said, showing me and Emily. "This is what matters, not what some strangers in a courthouse think. This us is real. This is what I fight for." Over the next few weeks, Dad began showing real progress. He picked up steady handyman work, started organising his bills, and even took Emily to her school events. He was still nervous around other adults, still felt the sting of humiliation whenever someone mentioned the case, but the fear no longer paralysed him. One evening, he sat on the couch, Emily asleep on his lap, and I asked, "Do you ever think about what happened at the courthouse?" He sighed, looking up at the ceiling. "All the time, but it's not a scar I'm ashamed of anymore. It taught me something, how strong I can be when I have to be, how much my kids mean to me, and how humiliation can't erase love." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and pride. The man who had been broken in that courtroom had started piecing himself back together, not because the system had given him a win, but because he refused to let the shame define him. By the time we left his apartment that night, Dad walked with his head higher, shoulders a little straighter. Emily held his hand tightly, and I knew that, even if the custody battle wasn't over, we had survived the worst of it together. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't ever be easy, but somehow, in the aftermath of public humiliation, my dad had reclaimed dignity in the only place that mattered, at home, with his family.